Om labhyastapassaye sa atman samyagyanena brahmacharyena nityam antaha sharirehi jyotirmayo hi shubhraha yam pashanti yatayaha kshina doshaha. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. The Atman, the indivisible self, in all beings, in all things, is realized by knowledge, austerity, veracity, and constancy, all of these constantly cultivated. When the seer beholds it, due to this practice, then he beholds it everywhere and in everything, existing here and now, even in this very life and body. Om peace, peace, peace. Om paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chaduskritam dharma samstaparana daya sadbhavami yuge yuge. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. Via support and sustenance of the sadhus and the devotees, and correction of the adharmic and the wicked, and for the maintenance of the eternal dharma, I embody myself forth from age to age. Om peace, peace, peace. Om sahana vavatu sahanau bhunaktu saha viryam karvo vahai tejasvi navaditamastu ma vidvishavanai. Om shanti shanti shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. In our recent classes here at SRV Hawaii and on the mainland, we've studied most recently the Advaita Vedanta series. We were calling it the Jnana Matra, the wisdom particle, and how that helps make thine eye single, how it develops the dual mind, turns it into single mind, and single mind into what has been called no mind, pure mind, and in the Sanskrit, of course, chit shuddhi, pure thoughts. So in that vein, we then followed it up with this series of classes, 4 to be exact, on the devotion of non-separation, which is actually now being worked on and posted on our website. It's one of those that will be added to the collection. And it also has for its theme, as the title suggests, Ananya Bhakti, or the devotion of non-separation, the idea of non-duality, or Advaita Vedanta. It suggests, as we were talking over the last series of 4 classes, 2 on the mainland and 2 here in Hawaii, that devotion and knowledge go together like 2 wings of a bird, and that the bird can't get off the ground without them. And so these 2 yogas that are sometimes by lesser thinkers or people of questionable philosophical understanding think that devotion and knowledge may be antagonistic to one another, that you should either follow just the bhakti path or just the jnana path. Or the same applies to the other two yogas. You should follow the path of inaction and be a monk, or you should follow the path of action and be a dharmic householder. But the idea of purna yoga, purna means fullness, the fullness of yoga, or the idea of synthesis of yoga, how to make a workable and operable hybrid out of the four yogas. And also the idea of integral yoga. The phrase has been used to integrate them all successfully, is more the idea. But when we come to the series of our talks that begin this week, this Sunday, and stretch on into the next 3 Sundays, we're calling it the Advaita of the avatars. And Advaita is, how do the greatest souls on earth, who have come to earth, those who are usually or generally agreed upon to be of the highest awareness, the deepest consciousness, how do they look at synthesis and integration and so forth? They actually look at it, sahaja, as being very natural. Sahaja tantra siddhanta, they call it. It's a way of looking at things that they were never separate in the first place, that they were always and ever one, and that the only reason that the sadhaka or the practitioner or the seeker or the aspirant or the teacher, the guru, even the seer, the sage, looks into the integral parts of this one operable system is to take it apart and see its workings so that they can explain the workings to others. And we see that the avatar who comes to earth from age to age, as I just chanted, I come to earth for the destruction of the wicked, the resurrection of the Dharma, which means having to destroy aspects of the old Dharma that have become decrepit, and also to support the sadhus. Sadhunam dushkritam is the word. So those who are seeking, anyone who's seeking can be a sadhu. You don't have to have long dreadnoughts and be walking around with a robe on in India to be a sadhu. You can be a contemporary sadhu, or even like Swami Vivekananda, a contemporary sannyasin who has renounced the world both internally and externally, but who still works heart and soul to try and lift the world up to Brahman. He used to say, do not drag Brahman down to this world. Instead, turn matter into spirit, raise it up. Turn it into a matter of deification rather than condemnation, as the old style yogi in the cave or sannyasin renouncing family and home did it quite often with an admixture of aversion. And that wouldn't lead to the highest goal. The highest it would lead to would be the abhava state. There's 2 great yogas, according to Tantra. Abhava yoga, which means the yoga of emptiness or no moods. Bhavas are like moods that come upon you. Oh, I'm in a good mood, or all of a sudden I'm in a formless mood, or all of a sudden I'm in a mood for devotion, or I'm in a mood for wisdom. I'm in a mood to meditate. Free of all those moods, abhava yoga. So that kind of healthy aversion, you might call it, or world weariness, does come upon people, and they do use it, practice it, and to their benefit. Then on the other end of the scale, there's Maha Yoga, which tends to blend what we were just talking about, all the 4 yogas. Action and inaction come together, knowledge and devotion come together, and then those 2 pairs also are put together into a composite. And when you see an avatar walking around on earth, usually the acclaimed ones, like we say, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, those beings who are at the head of their culture and their race and who are agreed upon being illumined souls and who have left behind a great record that never dies, the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal truth. When you see those walking around on earth, that's what you see. You're seeing a beautiful amalgam of the 4 yogas based on the attitude and the idea that they were never separate in the first place. But when you come to a class and you're looking at the various dynamics of these different yogas and trying to assign them a space inside of you and trying to integrate them yourself, then you're working on the level of a different kind of siddhanta, a different kind of conclusion. You're not yet seeing them as integrally one because you haven't had the non-dual experience, which is the glue that holds them all together, the devotion of non-separation, as we were talking about. And until you have that nirvikalpa or asampragyata or nirvana, or satori, that kind of experience at the highest level, then necessarily you must gravitate to that level. That's the level of knowledge and wisdom. Well, Krishna's great words, I come to sustain the sadhakas in this world, and then to destroy the adharmis, those who are not practicing the Dharma, who are actually antagonistic to it. And then overall to restore the old Dharma. He also says in the same Bhagavad Gita, from which those words are drawn, that one must know the end of knowledge in truth. So again, when you're attending Jnana Yoga classes, you're working on that knowledge which is transmuted into wisdom, which is then not transmuted at all. It's actually seen as a representative of the highest truth, which is already a fact of your existence. That truth thou art. Aham Brahmasmi, I am that truth. And that truth is Brahman, or Allah, or Almighty Father, or Buddha nature, or however you want to call it, by the different names assigned to it by these great knowers. They were knowers, they were lovers, they were meditators, and they were also actors. They were the greatest actors of all, putting on a body, coming here, having compassion for your suffering, which is actually, they know, unreal, and helping you to work out your karma, which is also equally unreal, because they are living in a karmaless state, an actionless state, a state in which action and inaction has been put together and fused, and which knows non-difference. It's the yoga of non-difference, or we looked at it a couple Sundays ago, the non-touch yoga. In Vedanta, in Sanskrit, that's called Asparsha Yoga, mentioned by Gaudapada in his great Karaka, his non-dual Karaka on the Mandukya Upanishad, which is only 12 slokas long, by the way, all on the word. You want to, if you're intrigued by that saying of Christ, this is Easter, so I should probably use some beautiful sayings of Christ. If you're intrigued by that saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, then you should probably look into the Mandukya Upanishad to see how Vedanta clarifies that saying of Christ, which, by the way, the direct disciples really didn't understand, the fishermen, when he said it to them. What's he talking about? In the beginning was the Word, and it was with God, and then it was God. How do I look at those three divisions, the A, U, and M of things? The Om, the Word. So the avatar is a manifestation of that word. I've said before, when you see Ram, you see Sri Ramchandra, he's got the Om sign painted on the palm of his hand, you see. And he means, when you see me, I'm the last form you will see, and then you will move into formlessness. That's why they sing such beautiful songs about Ram. They're legion songs, just to warm up the atmosphere here. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Arana Bhava Bhayadarana Nava Kanchalochana Kancha Mukakara Kanja Pada Kanjaranam Shri Ram, Shri Ram, Shri Ram. You probably couldn't write a song like that, a bhajan, to a great avatar. The earliest of all avatars on record really is Ramchandra. He was even prior to Krishna. And Krishna is called the archetypical soul, this primordial soul, which is the overseer of all souls in India. So in another form, earlier, Ramchandra was there, in another yuga. That's what he was just mentioning, yuge. And from age to age. So from age to age, I embody myself forth for those three reasons. That's the moniker of the avatar. Basically, in the Gita, it's usually referred to as the threefold teaching or message of the avatar. Number one, to sustain the devotees. So how did Christ put that? If a man loveth his life, then he shall lose it. If a man hates his life, then he shall get it back in eternity. So basically, you should not cling to life. Patanjali told us that. Why should you not cling to life? Not only is it an attachment, but it's also a relative station you're clinging to. Not only is it a relative station, but as long as you cling to life, you'll never be able to make yourself qualified for or worthy for eternal life, because you're going from beginnings to middles and ends. You see, that's the problem with the word. And the avatars know the word inside out. They know that everything from in form comes from the word, and everything disappears back into the word. A is creation, U is preservation, and M is destruction. Or to put it more succinctly, A is projection, U is sustenance, and M is dissolution. Dissolution back into the source, so that it will come back again in another cycle. So in the beginning, as soon as you heard Christ say that, if you were an astute Jnani, like Shankaracharya's disciples were, you'd say, wait a minute, stop there, Lord. There is no beginnings. You already taught us that. There is no end. There is no middle. That's an appearance in Maya. So it's obvious that Christ didn't want his religion built on origins. He wanted it built on the Almighty Father, my oneness with the Almighty Father. He was a non-dualist. He was also a sannyasin who said, when they called him a peacemaker, said, I have not come to bring peace. I've come to bring a sword, and with the sword I will separate father from son. Why would he do that? Because the father is interested in spiritual life and the son isn't, or vice versa. You might have noticed oil and water don't mix, but neither do the spiritual people and the worldly people mix. They have their own areas of operation, and they're quite often antagonistic to each other. They're not going to fit like oil and water. So in this world, at least, you have to go by those distinctions, those separations, and the way that you know those separations is through viveka. Interesting word, since Swami Vivekananda named himself after it, but by knowing those distinctions as being different from one another. So first distinctions, and then you come to the idea of non-difference or non-separation. In other words, you have to know what you're not in order to know who you are. And if you don't have that real clear in your mind, you're always substituting Maya for Brahman, objects for samadhi, people, personalities for principles. See? And you're always mixing it up. You're always having a poor admixture of those things which aren't getting you realized, which aren't giving you insights. In fact, quite often taking you the opposite direction of enlightenment for lifetimes. So to come to bring a sword means, if he said, I've come to bring a sword, it means like Buddha's First Noble Truth we were talking about this morning after meditation. First Noble Truth is there is suffering. To me, that's exactly the same as Christ saying, I have come to bring a sword. Why? Because there is suffering. You want to separate yourself from the source of suffering, which is nature. You might have noticed that these great avatars don't suffer. That even when they have cancer of the throat or when they're on the cross, they don't suffer. They can transcend the body's suffering. Sri Ramakrishna had cancer of the throat. Somebody brushed against him on his deathbed, so to speak, and felt a thrill of joy run through his arm. And Sri Ramakrishna turned his head and said, oh, you rascal, you've discovered my secret. So they asked him, don't you feel that hole in your throat, cancerous hole in your throat? He said, only when I talk to you. Otherwise, when you go away, my mind will go back to the lotus feet of Mother Kali, and I will be fine. So it's not just a teaching of morality or immorality or some promise of pie-in-the-sky bliss, things that it's been described at. It's a very practical thing. Vivekananda put it later, the only way that you will convince yourself of being not matter is to leave matter alone. If you can leave matter alone for an hour in your meditation, for a day in your retreat, or for a lifetime in your series of lifetimes, then you will learn the truth of formlessness, and you will be fit for the Brahman state. The avatars are seeing, looking, amongst the whole sweep of people, who's fit for the Brahman state. That's supporting the sadhakas, isn't it? They're here to support the sadhakas, so they have one eye of a triple eye fixed on that threefold teaching. The other, they're looking at the ad armies to see if they're mucking things up for the seekers, you see, and also seeing if some of them might themselves get tired of doing evil actions, like Prahlada, And some of the great seers of the past, some of them were actually thieves and robbers and so forth, and they became great saints and seers just by meeting a guru on a path. It's an actual path leading through the woods, not just a spiritual path. The same, the two are the same, really. So there's the second eye fixed upon this amalgam of people called those who are suffering, those who are lowly, those who are oppressed, and those who are evil. That's a whole cross-section of suffering humanity that the avatar comes specifically to help. Like Vivekananda said, I love my God, the realized souls. I love my God, the devotees. I love my God, the poor. I love my God, the suffering. But I love my God, the evil, most of all. Don't try this at home, kids, as they say. But there's the great sacrifice of an avataric being. Vivekananda, they say, if Ramakrishna had not been there, Vivekananda could have easily been the avatar of the age. That's how highly they hold him in regard. Millions of people hold him in regard. So this moniker, as I was calling it, of the avatars, has those threefold markings. And then, of course, the third being, I'm going to support this Dharma. That's the new dispensation. They were calling it that in Sri Ramakrishna's time, but somebody said, you know, they're calling your teaching the new dispensation. And Ramakrishna says, well, I don't know anything about that. I don't even know what that means. But they were assigning all sorts of major titles to his descent. When the avatar comes, then, of course, people gather. He used different stories for that. He said, when the lotus blooms in the wood, the bees come of their own accord. They don't need an engraved invitation. Or he would say, a wonderful musical band blew into town. So they set up their instruments, sat down, started playing the most beautiful music. And those that were there at the time got the most wonderful concert of their life. So they ran to tell their friends. And when their friends came to hear that music, the band had already packed up its gear and moved on to the next village. He's describing how the avatar descends from time to time, yuge, from age to age, into different time periods. Villages in this case would be this world, but it would be this world in different yugas, in different time periods. I mean, you can find about every 500 to 700 years a sign of these avataric descent. I was looking into the teachings of Moses recently. Actually, I had 3 new charts to present to you, but all the machines on the Hilo side of the island have broken down and I can't expand them for you, so I wasn't able to bring them, but I will bring them next week, even if I have to drive to Kona to find a machine that's working, and expand these so you can see them. But I was working on one chart called the Mahavakyas of the avatars. Mahavakya means great sayings. So I was inspecting the Zenavasta, and I was checking out the Song of Moses, and I was looking into the Quran and the teachings that Muhammad gave, and Zoroaster was considered avataric descent in his religion. Zoroastrianism almost gone now, although I was sitting next to a priest of the Zoroaster tradition on the plane a couple years ago. And we looked at each other and said, "Who are you? Oh, who are you?" And he turned out to be, his father was a priest of that religion, and he was also one. So I got to learn something about that religion in this day and age. So anyway, these great avatars in different religious traditions are of great interest to us because we're devotees of Ramakrishna and speak about a new dispensation. You're talking about the avatar's new threefold teaching. Why did he come? Basically to present the Divine Mother of the universe to us. That's one, because she's been hidden in all the other avatars. Rama and Sita wasn't considered a divine consort so much as she was just the wife of an avatar. Same with Krishna and Radha, and Muhammad and Fatima and other great couples. Christ and Mary, they were a divine couple together, father and daughter, or father and mother and son. So basically this appearance of the avatar is usually accompanied with the Divine Mother reality, but she's always behind the scenes. So, in this case, Ramakrishna came to introduce Mother Kali, the Divine Mother of the Universe, to us, and brought Sri Sharda with him, a beautiful manifestation of the goddess. He said about her, she's a combination of Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Kali in this age. She's a triple manifestation. Tripura Sundari, the beautiful Sundari, Tripuri, three-formed. So, goddess of arts and learning, Saraswati, goddess of abundance, Lakshmi, beauty, and goddess of terrible, non-dual truth, non-compromising truth, Mother Kali, all put into one person. And we saw how retiring she was. I mean, they sang beautiful songs about her. Devim prasanam pranatarti hantrim yogindra pujam jugadharma patrim tam sharadam bhakti vijnana datrim daya swarupam, and so forth. On and on in many verses. Mentions the Dharma, doesn't it? She, O propitious goddess, killer of misery and souls resigned, savior of religion in every age, by saints and sages worshipped, O mother kind. You see the connection? Those first three lines are the threefold dispensation of the avatar. I mean, didn't we just say, I come for the sadhus? So by saints and sages worshipped, O mother kind. And I come to sustain the Dharma. Devim prasanam pranatarti yugam Devim prasanam pranatarti yogindra pujam juga dharma patram. Juga dharma patram. She's the mother of Dharma. And she's here to sustain it. So there's the second connection with the original Gita avatar, incarnation of Krishna. So whether you talk about it in terms of millennia ago or this present time, you have that definite teaching of the Matri avatar, Divine Mother. Many of these, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if you look outside the door, you'll see the male pigeon. But the female pigeon is somewhere nearby. You just can't see her. So he meant these avatars come as males, but behind them is always that female principle, the Shakti. Because without her, as Ramakrishna said, without her I couldn't even lift my finger. He would stay in non-dual samadhi, but with her, she comes and makes his knowledge operable in the world. She wants to take that knowledge out, that wisdom out of Shiva, and Shakti wants to spread it broadcast amongst those people who are suffering mainly. So, yuge cha dharmasya, I spread the Dharma from age to age. So we have to understand this about the greatest incarnations. The idea about the avatars, they get what's called nowadays a bad rap. We'd rather go for some non-dual seer who has nothing to do with humanity. See, oh, he must be the greatest because he has nothing to do with humanity. But the avatars take a risk. They come here and they associate themselves with the poor, the lowly, the suffering, and even the evil beings. And that's not going to look good in the eyes of a lot of the rest of the world. When Vivekananda set up the Belar Mat, built the temple for Ramakrishna and started holding Durga Puja and stuff there in the early days in Calcutta, then all sorts of people started coming. So some of the devotees got together with him and had a meeting and said, you know, there's some women of ill fame coming. They shouldn't be allowed to come to the temple. And Vivekananda said, I beg your pardon, these are exactly the people we want to come. The sick don't need a doctor. The healthy don't need a doctor. It is the sick who need the doctor. So these people who have fallen from the Dharma, they need it more than any. So he was not a hypocrite. He wanted to set up the temples for worship and invite everyone. And the more that came, the better. And the more they soaked in, the better. Even though he said, when I was very young, I was very, very unsympathetic to evil people. Very unsympathetic. I used to be walking down the street of Calcutta, and if I saw a person of ill fame coming, I would go across the street and walk around them. I wouldn't even encounter them. He says, now I can live in the palaces and with kings and their concubines. See, I can sleep right in the same palace with them and nothing happens to me. I'm fine. So this idea of purity and impurity gets transcended when you transcend the idea of dharma and adharma. In the meantime, dharma and adharma form a very powerful teaching, as you can see here by this teaching, with that kind of preamble about the avatar that launches us into this series of 4 classes, which is rather rare to hear talk about a divine incarnation, isn't it? I mean, you usually go and you hear the teachings, or you go to puja and maybe worship one of these avatars and don't hear any information about their lives. But here, not only are you going to hear about an avatar, you're going to hear from 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 of them, and what they say from age to age, and therefore form some sort of an understanding around who they are, what kind of souls they are. Like I was saying, Christ on the cross, did he suffer? He broke out in song. He said, "O Lord, why have you forsaken me?" And so people thought that he had lost his faith at facing death. But I was reminded by Lex Hickson, our founder, that that was one of the most famous songs of the period in the hymnals. It was, "O Lord, why have you forsaken me?" So he was actually reminding people that death is an illusion, that you should not cling to it, that those who love their life will lose it, and those who hate their life will gain it back again in eternal life. However you want to put it, via the particular speak of any particular avatar of any religious tradition, you can draw these correlations. Like I said, Patanjali saying avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha. Those are the 5 obstacles to spiritual life. The first is ignorance of your true nature. The second is egotism. The third and fourth go together. They're attachment and aversion, raga dvesha. But the 5th is abhinivesha, clinging to life, or fear of death. If you consider death to be real, then you're like a snake living in fear of a frog, when it should be having it for dinner. So to think about life as being the ultimate station and not having any idea about eternal life is not acceptable. So if you're in the periphery of the avatar, if you're in any given age, if you're close to an avatar or come just after the avatar has lived in the body, salokya it's called, then you may get this teaching fresh. And you'll hear Sarupya, you'll find out, Sarupya, I'm the same form as him. He and I were human together. We embodied the human station. I must say, and I heard our founder Lex Hickson say it again, I said about talking to him about future lives, and he said, well, you know, there are other lives to live besides human. It was as if he was thinking of some other station to occupy instead of the human body. Always interested in humanity, because humanity and the ancestors form this very large pool of souls who are in dire circumstance in Maya. Some of them very noble have come into Maya to take it on, to try and transcend it. Others have just come here to vacation. Others have come here just to suffer. That's what Vivekananda said. You don't understand about humanity, do you? Some are actually here to suffer. That's their main purpose for coming into the body. And there again, you could take that in many ways, couldn't you? They're here to suffer because of their karmas. They're here to suffer for the sake of others. You can go in many different directions with these teachings, and you should, so that you'll fill out all of that. You'll flesh out all of those vacant areas in your thinking consciousness and come to a fuller realization. Because when you meet the avatar face to face, it is Sarupya in the same form, or Salokya in the same age, Yuge, or Samipya, you feel like he's very dear to you, or she is very dear to you, and you're very dear to them, then you have the divine coupling going on. They In India, they say there are many beautiful relationships, none better than the guru and disciple. It's when there's an apt guru that can transmit the teachings and a true disciple who's sincerely on the trail of freedom, of getting free, then you have the best coupling in the world. Better than mother and son, which is, or parent and son and daughter. Even better than lover and beloved, they like it better. Because anyone who attains lover and beloved, they're not even considered anymore. The matter's over for them. But guru and disciple, if they see that operable in the human context, they know that there's the acid of truth at work there. And if one person can get enlightened, many people can follow. That's how much responsibility you have to your ancestors, for instance. I'm quite often found talking down the ancestors. I don't want to give you the impression that I don't like the ancestors. It's that I don't want to get into rounds of birth and death with them. I want to get enlightened so that 7 generations on either side of me will also have the possibility of getting enlightened. That's the teaching. It's not like linear. It's like a layer cake. You're in the middle, and your ancestors and your children and so forth are on either side of you. If one person gets enlightened, then 7 generations of both sides, past and present, will get enlightened. That's the teaching. That's how powerful enlightenment is. It will spread through time, forward and backward, both. Because those souls who are living before are probably have taken on another body now, and you don't recognize them. Or they're still in an indeterminate state, about to take on another body. Imagine how much benefit you would be to them if all of a sudden you realized the truth. So the ancestors are a very worthy level of soul to contemplate, to come into knowledge of. So this being called the divine incarnation is aware of all strata. We say samipya, we say very dear. Everyone is very dear to that being, and that being is dear to everyone else too. Those who are antagonistic to the avatar, then of course they will not understand. And his love is so unconditional that he's also going to include them in his scope. See, he always comes back with a special eye on the evil beings, special eye on the suffering. That's why he's called Patita Pavana. A beautiful song, right? Ragapati Raghava Rajaram Patita Pavana Sita Ram. He's talking about Sita and Ram, the divine incarnation. Goes on, Sita Ram Jaya Sita Ram, and Ishvara Allah Tero Nam. So Ishvara and Allah, see, putting together the Hindu ideal and the Muslim ideal. This song was written there in India. And so the idea of Sri Ramchandra, the great avatar, being in company with Sita, the Divine Mother, hidden in form, is the Patita Pavana, the savior of the fallen and the lowly beings. And that's why they come. So again, some of those ideas around introduction to this next 4 weeks of class, you're going to have to speak in terms of yuge cha dharmasya, the Dharma as it appears to us age to age. This is more of a stable teaching, though. The Dharma is going to change exteriorly. Maybe that's a given, depending on the situation of the people who are there and the kind of avatar who appears. That's why I often used to give this teaching, say, some people think there are many avatars, and some people think there's just one, and he's going to return soon. But the real truth is the avatar is just one, but it comes many times. And in order to, if you understood the Advaita philosophy, non-dualism, the devotion of non-separation, then you know that formless consciousness can take as many forms as it wants. That's why you should use your mind as an alambana. You want to know that all bodies came from your mind, not from nature. Nature was just a material out of which they got formed, but the mind was the congealing power. When the mind got in touch with nature and it saw the 5 elements there, and it says, I can fashion 5 senses out of that. Earth with smell, water with taste, fire with sight, and so forth. You make those connections. If you look back on them after they've already happened, that's also good. But it would be better to look at them and know them before you got into the body in the first place. That's called a past master. Dalai Lama coming 14 times would be an example of somebody who knew that process already. And so, I'm trying to take another body, go into my mind, fashion a body, find my parents, so forth and so on. And it's all a matter of consciousness. So those beings know the kingdoms of heaven like the back of their hand, you see, inside and out, up and down the amber stairs of birth and death, as Aurobindo put it. I have come up and down the amber stairs of birth and death. So back to the point, your mind produces bodies. It uses the 5 elements supplied by Maya and by nature, but in the mind itself is the congealing power, especially if you put 7 billion minds together, like on Earth here. Maybe a little bit low in my estimate right now. I haven't seen the most recent numbers. Or you talk about the billions of souls that are in the ancestor realm, in the kingdoms of heaven within. That's a whole other strata of humanity, your ancestors. And as far as Vivekananda is concerned, he used to say, the gods and the goddesses, they're just big men and women. They're just big men and women. They come down too and take a human form. Why? Because they have to transcend the desire to be gods and goddesses. Because the gods and goddesses are always warring with the asuras, you see, the negative forces, for dominion over lands, over beings, and over pleasures. Heaven is a place of increased pleasure. So those beings who are there at the level of the ancestors and the gods, which are 2 different strata of the kingdoms of heaven within you, they're always in a warring faction, you see, trying to usurp the other, you see, and take on dominion. So yes, they're just big men and women. They have to be, the human soul has the ability to go beyond that and to get enlightenment. But would do that by knowing. So one of those things you're going to have to know then, back to the main point, is that the mind produces bodies. Your subtle body produces gross bodies, and it can do so ad infinitum. And that can be a problem too. The desire to produce bodies is a big problem, because it becomes a desire. We were talking this morning after meditation about that, the idea of rebirth in name and form based on time, space, and causality. Ramakrishna had made that statement. The more lifetimes you live in ignorance, the more you come to consider the world to be real. Now that's a great Mahavakya out of the Gospel of Ramakrishna. When I saw that, I said, there's a marvelous one-sentence phrase. The more lifetimes you live in ignorance, the more you consider the world to be real. Well, let's check that out here, out in the world. Doesn't everyone consider the world to be real, the body to be real, the senses to be real, the objects to be real, and their pleasure to be real, until they start experiencing pain in turns with pleasure? And then maybe they don't wake up even then. Kamalkanta sings, it is time to heed the mother's minstrel, that's him, singing this song that death will come and snatch away your life's work in an instant. Just like that. So, waking up to this presence of your precarious position, water on the lotus leaf, right? We sing that quite a lot. Nalini dalagata jalamati taralam tadvanji tipiati shaya chapalam vidhivyati abhimanagrastam lokam hatam sasamastram. Shokahatam cha samastam is actually the word. So basically those are those teachings of sorrow and suffering, and the water on the lotus leaf being very precariously balanced. So if there's just a little bit of a wind, and that water slides off, the upper water slides off the lotus leaf. He's using that as an analogy for human life, how precarious it is. Here and gone. And we don't mean here today and gone to Maui when we say that. Say here today and gone to the ancestors. They're in a different land. So anyway, back to this idea, the more lives you live in ignorance, the more you'll consider the world to be real, till pretty soon the world is the only reality and God is the illusion. That's not the Vedantic dictum. The Vedanta Dindima is Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya. Brahman is real, the world is unreal. So how did that get switched around? Well, let's just blame it on Maya, or the devil. But ultimately we're going to have to blame it on our own self for believing Maya, believing the devil, for not looking deeper into the truth of the matter. Well, that truth of the matter is Dharma. If you can keep up a dharmic lifestyle, then you will stay on that cutting edge of spiritual life. We were saying this morning, there's worldly life, there's earthly life, there's intellectual life, there's religious life, but then there is spiritual life too. Spiritual life is the rarest of all commodities, of those cross-sections of different kinds of lifestyles to live. But in between religious life and spiritual life is dharmic life. Some of us are finding out about that thanks to Tibetan Buddhism coming to the West and the work of different avatars to bring the Dharma current and forward through their followers from age to age, like from Ramakrishna to Vivekananda and from Vivekananda to the extended family. That kind of work is commendable and laudable, and actually we're in full gratitude for it, because then we get to sit and listen to teachings like this and consider them. We get to be reminded of the truth. And if you shall know the truth shall set you free. Another good Easter teaching. So the Dharma here, you can see this gate. This gate was actually a photograph I took of a temple not far from Benares. And it's a gateway to a temple you're entering into, to the Divine Mother. So I just took the picture of that and then Photoshop erased everything around it, telephone lines and various things that were going through there, as Indian style, as you know. So there's the three eternal gateways is how I wanted to use that as a teaching. And also to couple it with the four veiled doorways and the four fundamental paths of life. Those are all integrated here. Here's the four veiled doorways. Lokayatitya, Lokayatita, Marga, materialism. Mithya Gyan Marga, fundamentalism. That is, there's some wisdom there, but it's veiled by narrowness. Pravritti Marg, secularism. And Bahutva Marg, religious convention. I had to look for Sanskrit equivalents to explain these, because these are well known in worldly life of the individual in America and in the West, and basically all countries where spirituality has not been awakened to. Awakening to spirituality is something quite rare and goes by individual soul rather than by cultures, at least at this day and time. So that four veiled doorways is a good teaching. There's the four fundamental paths of life next to it. Vyavaharika, worldly path. That falls under the adharmic heading. So you can see adharma, dharma, and swadharma. Remember, I've given that teaching often that duality is a closed door. And you can't find a way out. Virtue, vice. You say, I'm going to be virtuous, but then you start thinking more about vice and vice versa. Pun intended. So basically this duality has to be added into with a triputi, with a third door. So dharma and adharma, back and forth you go. There's even songs about it that are worthy of looking into. Here's one by Kamalakanta. He says, Sharbanashi dare ashi, dharma e dharma, duto keli sharanam mahakalar manomohini. Beautiful bhajan to Sharananda Mai Kali. She's the bliss of Sat, truth. She's full of bliss and truth. Maya means full, actually. It's a word for fullness as well as for delusion or illusion. So he says here, the author of this song, Kamalakanta, says with a restless mind, you put to death Dharma and Adharma both with thy sword of wisdom. Sarvanashi, Dharyashi, Dharma, Adharma, Duto Keli. You put to death, Nashi means death, this idea of righteousness and unrighteousness, Dharma and Adharma, with your shining sword of non-dual wisdom. So good to bring that up in terms of this word Swadharma. People go from Adharma to Dharma, hopefully, and from Dharma they're looking for their true calling. That's Swadharma. In Dharma you're still considering precepts, vows, but you're going to have to refine those with sadhana, with practice. And when you do, then you find your Swadharma. You find out what you were really meant to do. And it's surprising sometimes. Sometimes you find out what you're really meant to do is entirely different than what you were doing the first 20, 30, 40, or 50 years of your life. All of a sudden you find your true calling and you arrive. And that usually is attended by something of a spiritual nature. That's Swadharma. So that's why I wanted to refer you to that. And that's basically the teaching, but it can be fleshed out with these beautiful quotes. If we look under Adharma, we see this quote from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. It's one of the 2 or 3 mother scriptures of the world. There are very few divine mother scriptures of the world, but the Chandi, the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, those are several of them. They're very precious. Here's an excerpt I found in the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, which is a book about that thick and that big. It's a huge teaching. She says, this is the mother herself, in an age of darkness, viciousness and vile acts become the normal code of behavior. Even the gods become deceitful, what to speak of humans and lower creatures. It is natural that injury come to those who injure others. But when peaceful persons devoid of enmity are injured, that is an act of wickedness, pure and simple. In such an age, one will find very few persons following the true Dharma. Sounds like this day and age, this earth, doesn't it? Very few people even seeking out what the true Dharma is, what to speak of following it. Or even worse than that, never even knowing that there's such a thing as Dharma in the first place. Being an adharmi and not knowing it. Having all this good intentions, but actually working for under the veil of darkness. It's quite common to do that. So it takes consciousness to rise out of the adharma and get to the dharmic level of things. If you've arrived at the Dharma, then you've made a huge step inward towards your spiritual enlightenment. And if you can abide in the Dharma and keep it constant day to day and consider everything from that level, then you've really won your salvation. But beyond salvation is liberation. Liberation will mean Swadharma. Let's look at some of the teachings around that. Lord Vashishta has some good ones in Vashishta's Yoga. He says, that intrepid spiritual wayfarer who inquires into the wise characteristics of Dharma, he treads the proper path. He learns concentration and meditation, the significance of the scriptures, discrimination between the real and the unreal, and knows what actions are to be done and which are to be given up. If you read the Bhagavad Gita in the first 4 chapters, you pretty much find what Krishna says about not giving up certain kinds of actions. They're called obligatory actions. Those you keep. Your duty, your dharma, you keep those. All others you give up. So you don't have this unholy admixture of things that are ill-considered and things that are well-considered, because then it will affect the fruits of those things that are well-considered. You'll be putting a damper on your best intentions and on your highest aspirations. You'll be putting a damper on that. So he pretty much hands out the formula for Dharma right there, doesn't he? You learn concentration and meditation. How few people do that. And then the significance of the scriptures. Less and less people are looking into the scriptures now. I was talking to the president of Advaita Ashrama in India, this beautiful monk, who's very helpful to SRV and a great friend. And he said, yes, Babaji, we sell a lot of books, hundreds, thousands of books monthly, and we've noticed a decline in those interest in the scriptures. So those non-dual scriptures, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutras, Ashtavakra Samhita, Avadhuta Gita, Adhyatma Ramayana, there are a whole host of non-dual scriptures that really give you the essence of life. They're really talking above the Dharma when you read them. They're talking Swadharma. They're trimming all the non-essence away and just leaving you with the essence. And that does have to work for you. It's like Ramakrishna saying, be like an ant. If you put down a mixture of sand and sugar, then the ant finds it. And then you come back later and there's just a bunch of granules of sand, and they've taken all the sugar. So when you read the scriptures, you have to take the essence and leave the non-essence out. That's discrimination, and it's what he talks about next, discrimination between the real and the unreal. That's in your actions, that's in your study, and that's in your meditation. Viveka is also Viveka Dhyan. It's also Viveka Gyan. And it's also Viveka Karma Dhyan, as you meditate on your actions day to day. And so it applies in all three of those levels, body, energy, and mind. You have to have discrimination. We were talking about that for over an hour this morning after meditation and after satsang. And then finally, what actions are to be done and what are not to be done. If you want to look into Yoga Vashishta, he often speaks about that. Guess who he's speaking to? Sri Ramachandra, the earliest avatar. He was a young boy in his teens when he went to Lord Vashishta, and Lord Vashishta was a graybeard. And so Lord Vashishta had this onerous but very privileged boon of teaching the avatar of the age, reteaching, you might say, the avatar of the age, these great teachings. You can also find teachings of what to do and what not to do in the last 3 or 4 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. How to give gifts in the right way, what foods to eat, what foods not to eat. Krishna saves those all toward the end of the Gita and mixes them in with the gunas, the teaching of Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas. How to do actions sattvically, not rajasically in restlessness, and not tamasically in sloth, but do them all sattvically. And the same with your thoughts. Have only sattvic thoughts, get rid of the restless thoughts, get rid of the heedless thoughts, see, brooding. And also acts. So you'll find that all listed very nicely at the end of the Bhagavad Gita by this avatar of the Treta Yuga. Now, other quotes here about the Vyavaharika. Shankara says, meditation on the meaning of truth as it is taught in the Vedanta leads to the highest illumination. By this means, the misery of worldly life, Vyavaharika, is destroyed altogether. So, imagine, if you will, a state of mind that is attended only by peace, subtle bliss, balance, harmony, and sometimes very deep visions and meditation. And you'll come to know more of the Dharmic person. The Dharmic person, at least the way we've seen them in India, and how it contrasts the Western people who are trying to attain Dharma, is that the Hindus, for instance, love their children, but they're ready to put their children away when it comes to meditation and retreat. The Westerners aren't. They cannot get them out of their mind. And they cannot get their acts out of their mind. They cannot get their money out of their mind. And they cannot get all of these other levels of Maya and even practical life out of their mind. They don't understand that if they can just get those out of the mind for a little while, that they will have a perfect position with which to re-encounter them when they come back to them. So you go away from cell phones, and you go away from children, you go away from your wife or husband if they're not in step with your spiritual life, and you put yourself completely samadhana, focus on reality alone. You sharpen the mind like an arrow with thoughts on reality alone, and then you aim it toward the target and you pierce it. The target is the imperishable Brahman. And once you get that, you can come back to all those same things again: objects, thoughts, actions, people, relationships, and you'll be perfectly in tune with handling them. And basically that's pretty much a description between adharma and dharma. Adharma isn't necessarily just outright evil in this age. The real evil in this age, according to Ramakrishna, is worldliness. He says it's a chronic disease that has taken over everyone. So in old ages, other yugas, it was evil. You see. Not that we don't have some very evil people around nowadays and doing some very evil things, but what is keeping those evil people from pushing the button? You know what I mean? Nuclear war. What's keeping them from doing that? Pleasure. They're getting too many good things from us for their own pleasure. I think I'll destroy America now. Well, let's see. I really like that TV show. What's it called? You see. So the great dictators, that take their hands away from the button, that's Maya's purpose, you see. That's Divine Mother's safety zone. She's got them all trapped in Maya. And they're not going to sacrifice. A sacrifice is for the avatar to do. Ishvara. See? Streaks of blood are running down her beautiful black form, like crimson flowers floating on black waters. That's Kali, a song about Kali. So some songwriter sat and meditated on Kali. That's what that means. That means sacrifice. She's always sacrificing for her precious spiritual children. Doesn't it sound like Dharma? Doesn't it sound like why the avatars come to earth? To uphold the sadhakas? Because if they're given a teaching like that, then they know the true meaning of sacrifice, and they begin to have appreciation for the sacrifice, gratitude for the sacrifice, and pretty soon they can be cut in the image of sacrifice. That's called yagya in Sanskrit. It's a huge word to unwrap. Dharma is a huge word, yagya almost bigger. How to do the act of sacrifice consciously for the good of all beings. Very, very rare and very, very powerful form of austerity, tapas. So we just chanted, Labis tapasa hesa atma samyagineda brahmacharya nityam. You get realization of the Atman through continence, moderation, austerity, knowledge, and veracity. All of those constantly cultivated. That's Dharma. Dharma is practice, or at least the doorway leading to practice, because Dharma stops, and you could also call this the doorway between these two gateways, is called sadhana, spiritual practice. That defines you from the worldly. That also defines you from the intellectual, from, say, the professor. The difference between a teacher, a guru, and a professor. It also defines you differently from even the dharmic people. Because the dharmic people have found the wisdom, and they're living in the wisdom, but they haven't started practicing it yet, in many cases. So sadhana is the doorway in between those two gateways, I would say. Vyavaharika, then, the worldly path, Shankara brings that out as a teaching. Now you can see here that Adharma has Vyavaharika as one of its components, but Dharma has these two as its components: dualism and transformation. Dualism, we were saying this morning again, is very rich. That is, I and my Father are two, is a very rich path. Again, sometimes you hear us talking so much about Advaita in spiritual life in India, in Dharma, in SRV and so forth, that you think, oh, dualism must be something I got to transcend. But there's a lot of people living in dualistic. It's not fundamentalistic, as we've already talked about that as being one of the Michigyan paths, right? One of the adharmic paths. Narrow fundamentalism is not what we mean when we use that term, dualism. Advaita in India has always been that man and God are two separate things, but guess what? God exists. Dualism here like, say, the rock and hard place between science and the theologians. God does not exist in one of them. And in the other, the kind of God that is existing is becoming very questionable. I don't think I'd want to believe in a God that sent me to an eternal damnation, you see. So, in the West, it's hard to find a real honest-to-goodness dualism that you can feel good about, you see. But in India, Hanuman and Ram, you see, Krishna and Balaram. You find these divine relationships, whether they be between two males, a male and a female, or two females, whatever the case may be, or transgender, you'll find them peppering the field of dualism, Advaita. So we must say about Advaita that it's very rich in its offerings. So that's why it's classed under Dharma in India as one of the eternal gateways. Also, yoga has to be classed there. Yoga, I had a hard time deciding in this chart whether I would put yoga under the Advaitic or under the Vashishta Advaitic category, but I thought yoga basically is transformation by getting a hold of your energy and bettering yourself. That doesn't happen in Advaita. You're already perfect. You don't need to better yourself. You can't use that as an excuse not to do the sadhana and do the work. That's not the point, because a lot of people make that mistake. But nevertheless, you cannot turn the Advaita into a path of transformation, because Brahman does not transform. It's already pure and perfect from the get-go. I was going to say in its inception, but it has no inception. See, so you can't really start explaining it or talking about it. It's a pure and perfect state always at hand. And the human being must rise to it, as we were just saying, out of matter, out of fundamentalism, out of narrow religious considerations, even out of worldly paths and intellectualism. It must rise to understand it. It's going to have to take a upward trajectory or an inward trajectory, what we used to call inward ascension back in the old days. Inward ascension. Because if we say ascension, you're starting to look up, and see, oh, is God up there somewhere? No. There's just the 5 elements up there, and probably 2 of them are in scarce demand. Here we have all 5. Up there, probably only 3 in most places so far. So you don't look up that kind of ascension for God. You don't pray up. You pray inward always in India. And Christ meant you to do that too. Kingdom of heaven is within you, so you pray inwards if you're going to pray at all. And the further inwards you go, as Vivekananda said, pretty soon you only find the self, yourself. That's all you find. Ancestors go away, gods and goddesses go away. Even the Trinity goes away. That's why Ram has the Om sign painted there, because they want you into the formless condition. You go into it every night in deep sleep. Why don't you go into it consciously in meditation then, and see how that differs from deep sleep? Because deep sleep you go in a fool and you come out a fool. But in meditation you can go in a fool and come out an enlightened soul if you see what's in there, the light of deep sleep. Formlessness is there. And it's a formlessness that's not empty. It's empty of form, and it's empty of name, and it's empty of suffering, and it's empty of duality. That's a nice emptiness, you see. Does that sound like the old school way of defining shunyata? No. This is the cutting edge of shunyata. This is the kind of emptiness you're going to be looking forward to, because there's no problems and no worries in deep sleep, and you're feeling blissful. Blissful. Peaceful. I was walking through the health food store just yesterday, and all of a sudden, through all of the din and everything, came this Beatles song. Give you everything I got for a little peace of mind. And then some drum roll by Ringo, you see. Flashing you back to the 60s. Give you everything I've got for a little peace of mind, you see. So that's what you're experiencing there in deep sleep. And also some subtle bliss. And that peace and bliss will also pervade your waking state if you bring it back down. And to bring it here in the world, since suffering is and peace is not here, is a very difficult proposition for any aspirant. That's why the teaching of Dharma and Adharma. You're going to have to put to death both of them to get to that kind of level of consciousness. Well, that's why a little bit around this idea of yoga, path of transformation, they want you on that, unless you already understand non-duality, which is a very rare cross-section of human souls. They want you on the path of yoga. It is the darshana of transformation. It's how you transform yourself. And a self that's already pure and perfect, yes, but you're really talking about this self, ego self, mind self, not the Atman self or Buddha nature self. That's already a given, pure and perfect. But this can't see that yet. So if you make your eye single, which is right there in the center of the forehead, which is right where the mind and brain complex is, then you can see that truth, and the truth will, so forth and so on. You see, on Easter, will set you free. Whether it's in deep sleep, death, meditation, or samadhi, those are the 4 times when you're courting freedom. Freedom might as well be the same as formlessness. So, Swadharma then, what is Swadharma about? I could say a lot more about the yoga of transformation, but you just must come to one of my retreats on yoga. We'll look at the 8-limbed yoga, because I have a very strong penchant for it. I mean, I used to say, you look at Sri Ramakrishna and you see Tantra embodied, and you look at Vivekananda and you see Vedanta embodied. But I'm a yogi, see. And that's where how I've made my way in spiritual life, is through yoga. So that's why I don't like to see it replaced by hatha. Hatha, as hatha is fine, but don't call it yoga. Yoga is something entirely different than hatha. It has a little bit of hatha in it, but it's got 7 other limbs that you're not looking at yet. And that's why what they want you on, the path of transformation, because breathing exercises and hatha yoga have not transformed us. They've made our bodies a little healthier, maybe, made our lungs a little bit more capacity to breathe in and out. But that's still life, isn't it? That one who loves his life shall lose his life. So what about eternal life? How can I get that? That's 7 other limbs of yoga that's leading me to samadhi, which is a sure and certain death of ignorance, if I were to climb that tree of yoga. So I could say a lot more about that, but let's finish this chart up, and possibly this half, with this final quote on Advaita, the way of non-dual abidance. Shiva says, "The true renouncer, called the great actor and the great enjoyer, has transcended both dharma and adharma and gotten free of birth and death." This is in the Yoga Vasishta scripture again, that he says this story about Parameshvara Shiva and his disciple talking to him. So he's also proclaiming this synthesis, integration, transformation of two-ness into oneness, and being there to watch it happen. Like we were saying this morning, slowing the process down so you could actually see how transformation is taking place. Because once you see it, then you'll know the dynamics of inner life. You'll know what the subtle body and the causal body are doing to produce the gross body. You'll know what the A is doing to produce the U, and the U is doing to produce the M, and the M is doing away with to produce the next A in the cycle, Om, right? And that's called a yuga. Yuge chadharmasya. The avatar knows about this because he's watching the yugas go by. That's why Buddha is one of the avatars to us. Call him a Buddha. I mean, we could say Muhammad is an avatar of Islam, but they don't really like the idea. They like prophet better. He was a prophet or a messenger, because the idea there is that man cannot be God. But the Indian Advaita has a different way of looking at that. In fact, Vivekananda said, man is just God walking around on 2 legs. That's how he put it. And the sooner we recognize that, the better for all of us. So whatever the case may be, same with Moses, a messenger, not necessarily an avatar, but we're using avatar in this next series of 4 classes to indicate that supremely sublime soul who has this knowledge in spades and who can transmit it to others, and who comes again and again from age to age to do so at great sacrifice to him or herself. Mostly him, because her is always in the background making this happen, this Divine Mother. And that to me is the real import of Ramakrishna's descent in the 1800s. I didn't finish that teaching, basically. He came, number one, to bring the Divine Mother teachings. Number two, the universality of all religions. He's not, somebody has come now who not only professes that all the religions are true, but has proved it by his own practice. He found the enlightenment in Muslim religion, he found enlightenment in the Tantra, he found enlightenment in the Vedanta, and in the Christian tradition too. He saw Christ and had that realization. So these are his own experiences. Avatar is a quick study, as we often say. So in this march of universalism, you see it's been at the very warp and woof of India's thinking from its very inception. That is basically Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti. Ekam Sat, one truth, Vipra Buddha Vedanti, called by different names. So that's the most ancient saying about universal religion in any scripture, in any religious tradition, the Rig Veda, carbon dated earliest, even if you want that kind of proof. But as far as historicity is concerned, that was the first great declaration of the universality of all religions. And it came from a country who is the mother of all religions. Does that mean that she's the best? It means that she never had one prophet in one book. She never limited herself. She had hundreds and dozens of each. And, the 6 darshanas start off proving that. There's yoga and Vedanta and Tantra and Buddhism and Samkhya and Nyaya and Vaisheshika and then there's Sikhism and Jainism and other great religions that are there as products of Mother India's long-standing evolution, spiritually speaking, religiously speaking, dharmically speaking. So this is why so many avatars have come out of India, is another way of putting it. And they're still coming. And not just avatars, you have saints, seers, yogis, rishis, avadhuts, siddhas, munis, sages, and so forth. Vibhutis, there are some Ishvarakotis, there's so many names of this different level of realized soul. So we know there's different levels of ignorant souls. Intellectual people can be very ignorant, so we can't call them enlightened yet. The difference between Einstein and Ramakrishna is vast. They both believe in God, but one realized God. The other one was talking all the time about relativity. Where is there any mention in science about reality? It's all about relativity, have you noticed? I'm sorry, there's an opposite here that you're not looking at. Relativity has an opposite, like everything else. It's called reality. What is the reality of a thing? It's not changing sand, shifting sand, changing particles. That's relativity. You got that right. So you can talk about God, but to realize God is a different thing. You have to spend some time in the Dharma, sussing out the deepest level of the teachings and make yourself a realized soul. Get into a state of illumination. Sharpen your thoughts and use them as an arrow to penetrate Maya and hit the mark of Brahman. As out of the Mundaka Upanishad. Mundaka Upanishad says that. So, a teaching around Dharma, Adharma, and Swadharma to get us rolling on this series of classes. Let's take 15 minutes now while the live streaming audience, welcome by the way, can look at this chart up close on their computers, and the rest of us can take a little refreshment and a little bit of reflection and come back in 15 minutes for the second half. Aloha, namaste. It is Easter Sunday in the afternoon. We started out with meditation, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. We live streamed our satsang at 7:15. We're doing that now Sunday morning instead of Tuesday night because Sunday morning at 7:15 here is just afternoon on the East Coast. So some of my students on the West and East Coast can actually tune into the satsang on a weekend, make it a part of their Sunday. Now we're in the afternoon here in the second half of our class on the Advaita of the avatars. I'm concentrating more on the avatar portion of that statement because we've had teachings about 2 or 3 months of Advaita teachings, as I said at the beginning, introduction in the first half. So we're looking more into the divine personality. And another thing that may be said about this evolution of consciousness, if you could call it that, is that these beings know that if they, be better put this way, that one being who is the avatar that comes many times knows that the Dharma is going to be rendered decrepit and old and useless over a few thousand years. So that's why about every 500 years they have to come back and resurrect it. So that was something I didn't mention about that idea of keeping the Dharma constant. Stapakaya, they call it steady Dharma. So they have to come and resurrect it, and anything that's gotten outmoded or outdated or used in a bad way is going to be removed from the old Dharma, and then it's going to be resurrected using the same principles that are always there Advaitically, but giving them a makeover in accordance with that day and age and those people. A good case in point is if you have fishermen for disciples, or maybe you have monks for disciples, or maybe you have householders for disciples, or your basic constituent is made up of different kinds of people, then you're going to have to appear to them according to the needs of that age. And that will change. But the thing that won't change is the essence of the Dharma. You might even have to give the Dharma itself a kind of facelift to make it understandable or comprehensible to those people. In this day and age, Vivekananda said, I want to give truth, dry, hard reason in the furnace of Jnanam, wisdom, and I want to give it sweet, spicy taste cooked in the kitchen of yoga. And I want to make it as easily digestible that a baby could digest it. So and he said, nobody knows how hard a task that is until you've tried it. So he wants to take these 4 yogas and make this good admixture and make it so accessible that even a spiritually immature person, like an infantile spiritual infant, could begin to understand it and get some attraction towards it, because divine attraction is going to take yoga maya first in the soul, and then they'll become attracted to path or teacher or dharma. And that can happen many ways too. I know in my own sangha, a lot of the early people were attracted by this music. So even though my voice isn't the greatest nowadays, I continue to try and introduce some of the songs into the teaching, so that because I know that's an attracting feature, that people will hear the truth clothed in melody, and following the old axioms that a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. Otherwise, you're sitting listening to 3 hours of stark jnana yoga, and maybe that's a little bit of an overload. But even that's intended. It's called the sponge method. The mind is the sponge, and you inundate it with so much wisdom that ignorance has no hold on you anymore. And then you go home later and you squeeze out the sponge, that which you can't digest or don't need yet, both. And then you come back again for another infusion. So that transmission of knowledge takes place week to week, month to month. And eventually, if you learn it, it takes place lifetime to lifetime. We were talking this morning, why didn't Ramana Maharshi have teachers? Because even the avatars have teachers. Buddha took 2 Samkhya teachers before he went into the wilderness. That was 550 years before Christ. Ramakrishna took a teacher on Tantra, a woman teacher. He took a teacher of Advaita Vedanta, Totapuri, and he took a Muslim teacher when he was practicing the Muslim religion. Govinda Rai was his name, I think. So he took these different teachers, and he didn't need them, not for proving anything to himself. He'd already learned everything he needed to know, and he was coming here for our sake. But he has to take a teacher to show us, yes, this is necessary. Besides, if he's going to prove the universality of all religions, it's going to be even more impressive, make an impression on people, that is, if he does it through traditional sources and teachers. And then it's going to have that authority behind it. So that's something else that can be added to this knowledge of Avatar, which is not usually very very well taught or known. It's not like a kind of a collection of things you can present, teaching style about the avatars. Basically, Leela Jan is the thing with Avatar. Leela Jan means meditation on their play, on their sport. I mean, the sport of Christ is seen in evidence on every lawn in the neighborhood at Christmas time, right? The manger, the three wise men, you can go up there and look on it, you'll see that. But probably you want to sit down and meditate on those neon lights because the cops will come and get you. You can look from a distance, but don't get close to my Leela Jan. See, that's my Leela. So whether it's Ram or Krishna or Christ or Buddha, they all had a life. That life is sacrosanct. It's an example of Dharma. They're the best exemplars of Dharma. So that's more for meditation. You actually go in. It's the highest meditation on God with form you could probably attain, is to meditate on the lifetime of the Buddha, if you're a Buddhist, you see, and everything he went through, including his long meditation under the bo tree, or his main teachings. Sukshma Jan, the teachings of the avatars, mixed with Leela Jan, meditation on their sportive play, is a powerful combination. We talk about putting jnana and bhakti together, there you have it. Usually you put meditation and wisdom together. That's the combination. Or you put karma with devotion. But here you can take jnana, wisdom, and put it with devotion, and it's called Leela Jnana. So that's the way that you usually understand the emanation of God, the incarnation of God, the manifestation of divinity, or the avatar. We don't mean that in a Hollywood sense, by the way. We mean it in the true spiritual sense of the term, Sanskrit term, avatar. It's not just a rock band or something of that ilk, you see. But it has to be also reserved for that divine soul who's a rarity once in every 500, 700 years. So saying that, then coming to more of a storyboard than a chart. This is, when I started out, I thought I'd make storyboards, but then I thought, well, these are really charts more than storyboards. But here is an example of a kind of early storyboard I made based upon Sri Ramakrishna's Radiant Road to Self-Realization. I don't want to take it at length, but I want to use it as a way of showing how an avatar descends, because that's the meaning of the word. That which descends, avatar. Descends out of where? The sky? No, don't look up to pray. It comes inward ascension style out of the great light of consciousness, Brahman, through the word, through the Trinity, through the rishis and saints and seers, into the realm of the gods, into the realm of the ancestors, into the realm of the human beings, like that. That's how it descends. It comes out from inside of the kingdoms of heaven, and it goes through every one of them on its way, and then it'll retrace its step up the amber stairs of birth and death, as I was saying, in like fashion when it gives up the body. So the body to it is an association. It's an add-on. It's a necessary vehicle in order to reach those who are embodied. And I was saying today is Easter, so the resurrection to me, the meaning of it, is not based upon the body, the dead body coming back to life. That doesn't happen. Well, maybe in a hospital occasionally. But basically, it means the subtle body has produced a vision for the followers, Mary Magdalene and others. See, they will see the subtle vision of Christ because he's projecting it out of his subtle body, and he's making them see it, just like Moses saw a burning bush and so forth. Paul saw Christ on the road to Damascus. So Christ had been dead for centuries. His body, what was he seeing? He was seeing a manifestation of his subtle body through the causal body. He was impressing upon you as a vision. So everything from a ghost, which is a sub-reality, there's a whole level of reality called pitris, or bhutas, means disembodied souls who are unresolved in their karma. They don't have a place to go. They're floating. They're in the sunken grounds, the patalas, and they're floating. And if they've been one place on earth, like say this house for a long time, then you're sitting in this house one night and you see them appear again. See? Because they're not in mastery of their emanation like an avatar is, but they're just thinking about that place they spent 50 or 60 or 70 years, so all of a sudden a manifestation of their subtle body will show up there and you'll say it's a ghost, you see. So that's coming out of the subtle body of that being, which is unresolved, as we say. But in the case of an avatar, fully resolved karma, absolutely no karma, as Krishna says in the Gita, karma, vikarma, and akarma, what's to do, what's not to do, and how not to do it all, the art of non-action, they're masters of that. And so they can make you see these various visions of themselves. And of course you'll have to be tuned to it. If you're not, then they're going to have to penetrate through your ignorance to make you see it. So there has to be a receptacle and a transmitter. It's like Ramakrishna said, somebody's furiously sending an emergency message through a telegraph down to the next village. And the person on the other end is just waiting for a message to come through. And it's not happening. Because there's a break in the wire. Somewhere along the phone line in the jungle, some monkeys have been up there messing around with the wires, you see, it's caused a break. So they have to send out a crew, repair that, find it, repair it, and then the message gets through. So that's Ramakrishna's plain story about Indian village life and transmitters and receivers, basically to evoke a sort of understanding in us that if you're open to the transmission of the teacher, the guru, the saint, the seer, the sage, or the divine incarnation, then you're going to be receiving messages from them all the time. Maybe they'll come in different forms too. It won't be like, oh, God spoke to me with a voice of thunder. That can happen, like it happened to Moses. But it can also be intimated in the most subtlest, sweetest ways, in just something that occurs to you in your everyday life. And you have to have a subtle consciousness that's that refined in order to detect it as a manifestation from higher consciousness, if you want to put it that way. So I wanted to use this chart to show you how a being like an avatar comes down. This was actually kind of an accident for me because I was writing a book of Ramakrishna stories. I was taking the gospel of Ramakrishna and extracting every story out of it. I had a plan to extract every the teaching out of it later, but I haven't gotten around to that yet. But I wanted to take every actual story and give a little commentary on it. So it's in this library now, the stories of Ramakrishna, of Sri Ramakrishna. So in doing so, I had to categorize all these stories eventually on the computer. And in order to categorize them, I had to put them into different headings. So these are the different headings that happened. And so when I put them into headings, I said, this looks like a road. This looks like a pathway that the avatars follow, or that any being could follow. And I usually teach it ground up, but I wanted to show you in this way how out of Brahman, due to the power of Shakti, the avatar comes into embodiment out of divine love, in a state of unity, in possession of the truth, and shows us samadhi. At the break, one of my students said, in the first half you'd only told us 2 of the reasons why Ramakrishna came. To bring the mother reality into our attention and to show the teaching of universality of all religions. So I said, well, In Ramakrishna's case, there's probably 2 or 3 other competitors for that third one. But I would say to show samadhi is one of them, one of the most important. We never saw such a copious map of samadhis that ran across the being of Sri Ramakrishna in any other incarnation in human record. This man was a copious map of samadhis, and he was also off the map with a lot of his samadhis into formless samadhi. So that's a very wonderful teaching, not just to say, oh, Master, you're a copious map of samadhis, but he was actually, again, being an exemplar and saying, here, samadhi is your true nature. I'll show you how to have it. And then after I have it, please have it yourself, you see. My teacher made a remarkable statement once, and he was going on like this. He said, in the West, you think of the divine incarnation as a savior. But on the Eastern horizon, we don't think of him as a savior. We think of him as an exemplar. Very profound saying if you use the Viveka Gyan, the discrimination of your own intelligence, to say that, oh, I see, we've been taking the avatar as a savior and saying, please save me, and therefore becoming weak and relying on prayer and so forth. Prayer that quite often is asking for things that the avatar doesn't want you to have, maybe. Knows they're not good for you. But on the Eastern horizon, we're thinking of him as an exemplar. That's why we have so many of him coming out of the Trinity. I've said they come through the Trinity because there are avatars in Vaishnavism, 10 of them, and one of them hasn't come yet. If you might have heard that teaching, Kalki is still the coming avatar. Buddha was the last one. And so they're talking about Kalki now being the next one. So Vaishnavism has this idea of the 10 avatars. I mean, there's a song about it that's very beautiful too. I don't know if I have it up here. I could sing you the last verse of it, I think. Shri Jaya Deva Kaverida Mudita Mudaram Shrinu Shupadam Shukadam Bhavasaram Keshava Drita Dasavida Rupa Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare. And then you sing Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare. And we go on like that singing, and then I sing you 9 other verses all about the 9 other avatars. Well, Jayadeva, this great songwriter who put this together, says, O Mahavishnu, Keshava, Achyuta, Arisundana, Bhagavan, Govinda, Rishikesha, Jaganavisha, Jaganivasa, Janardana, Keshava, Krishna, Madhava, Madhusudan, Purushottama, Varshnei, Vasudeva, Vishnu, Yadava, Yogeshvara, thou of many names and illustrious forms. Thou who descends as the avatar to save living beings, please accept this hymn to thee by the humble poet Jayadeva. May it bestow goodness and joy, the essence of life on everyone. Victory unto thee. The 10th verse of Dasa Avatara. Dasa means 10, so about the 10 avatars. In the previous verse he's singing Keshava Drita Buddha Sharira. Sharira means form. You came in the form of the Buddha last time. So Vaishnava actually accepts Lord Buddha as one of its avatars, which sort of points the finger to the fact that he was an Indian man. He didn't say, soul. Zen came later. He's not a Chinese man. He was an Indian man. So India, they looked to India for the birthplace of Lord Buddha. And now the borders have shifted, so he's actually Nepalese. But the Nepalis are using that as a matter of great spiritual pride, and I hope aspiration. Because when I was there a year and a half ago, I was corrected when I said he was a Hindu man. No, sir, he's Nepali. I didn't keep track of my political borders, and they're shifting. So, he comes out of Brahman via the power of Shakti. As Brahman and Shakti are one, like fire in its heat, like water in its wetness. And that's the unity of Shiva Shakti idea in Tantra and Brahma Shakti idea in Vedanta. Off of the summit of enlightenment, you see. I put little facets in there to give us an idea. And with divine love and in possession of unity and truth, he has samadhi in view of all of humanity. Some of them think he's a madcap and he's crazy and needs to be committed, but actually he is very committed. He's extremely committed to the truth and to all of these higher principles, and he wants you to get committed too. And he has accompanying, as we said, to this idea of universality. He knows that all religions are innately one. They're not. He doesn't have to come here to prove them to be one, unless you have a hard time with that. And then he's going to help you understand the innate or intrinsic oneness of all religion, which is why I've been saying lately, all religion is indigenous to your soul. There's no such thing as a foreign religion. Thank you. No such thing as a foreign religion. So if we want to really be kind, or we really want to be judicious, just, what to speak of wise, then we should start looking into Islam. It's here upon us. And we should start making the Sufis and the Mohammedans, those practitioners, good friends of ours. They're the new kid on the block. Something new has a lot to offer. Muslim is the new religion. Muhammad, being very recent. All the other religions, Christianity is rather still new. 2,000 years is not that much of a period. And before that, Buddhism is 550 years before Christ. Buddha, that is himself, and its march. So we look back in time and we see these ancient religions, but we see that all of them are indigenous to our soul. That should be the mindset we adopt. That's universality. And he already has it in spades. He already knows this. This is the Vedanta Dindima. This is the conclusion of everything that he lives in. Now come down a little further and you see that direct perception would be the next step. And then you take that turn, that very stark turn of understanding form and formlessness. If you were coming the opposite direction, this would be a very difficult thing to attain. You'd be having the samadhis of grace, the samadhis of auspicious timing, the samadhis of knowledge, the samadhis of compassion, the samadhi of renunciation, but you could not quite get to the samadhi of formlessness. That is reserved for beings who know themselves to be the Atman, to know themselves to be Buddha nature, to know themselves, I and my Father are one style. So that's going to be a very cutting edge kind of formlessness. Remember, there's a kind of formlessness that is nature in abeyance. And people are mistaking that for reality. In other words, form, fine. Hopefully divine form. Deification of form, better. But then you get to formlessness of deep sleep. That's not samadhi, because you're not getting transformed in it, are you? If we all got transformation in deep sleep, we'd all be looking at each other as enlightened beings, and we'd all be radiating the truth. And unfortunately, that's not the case. We're still dealing with the things of the world, and in various ways. So the idea of formlessness in deep sleep is exactly in accord with what they call unmanifested prakriti. That is, nature held in abeyance. If you study it as an alambana for your meditation, you'll realize that's where all form came from. You might as well put an Om sign right about there, you see, because that's where you see everything go back into Om, and you'll see everything come back out of Om. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Then you begin to understand that Triputi and how it's a double door into form, into formlessness, and then back out of form. That's why Om, as a mantra, is superlative. If you don't have a teacher and you can't get a mantra and you don't have a path yet, you still can chant Om. And even the mere chanting of it will give you a very deep level of understanding. Even without studying the scriptures, they say that's how powerful the word is. It'll suggest itself to you. If you have hidden some scars of spirituality or religion back inside of your mind that aren't manifesting yet, then Om will bring them out. Just saying the word. That's why they call it Dirga Pranava. You introduce it with your breath, right? In breath, Puraka, held breath, Kumbhaka, expelled breath, Rechaka, and you go Om, and A, U, and M are formed by the palate and the tongue in such a way that you understand. It's called Dirga Pranava, one very long recitation of the word. And you do it each morning before meditation. So it's a very powerful practice that even by itself ushers in enlightenment of a kind and also wakens up your hidden samskaras. At the very least, it would bring you some sort of peace. Have you ever just felt peace by sitting and chanting one word, you see, like that? Oh, I feel much better now, thank you, you see. So that form and formlessness, anyway, stop to talk about it a little bit, because it's, I'd say, the last duality that the mind will contemplate. Just prior to that would be bondage and liberation. Those are the two most subtle dualities of all. Dualities like pleasure and pain, get over it as quick as you can. Dualities like dharma and adharma, find your swadharma. But if you get to that level of reaching the formlessness, then you'll want to start contemplating form and formlessness as a duality and try and, as the song in India, I could sing it for you, goes, take two black rocks and smash them together. That's what Mother Kali does. She takes the black rock of form and the black rock of formlessness, and she smashes them together into smithereens, and what's left over is non-duality. Mm-hmm. So form and formlessness as concepts are getting in the way of this final attainment of a higher station of consciousness. So obliterate them. And you'll do that by knowing them, right? By contemplating them, not by running away. Well, I don't think I'll think about that. No. You think about it. You have a word for it. If you have a word for it, you can think about it. And if you can think about it, you can transcend it by coming to know it, see. So form and formlessness, very important. All of these things then he will show, like Ramakrishna did, how to take a teacher, as we were talking about already. Grace, that is this very beautiful and unfigurable quotient in the formula of spiritual life is grace. Even the seers don't really know. They all say, well, I had samadhi, but I think it was by grace that happened. I didn't feel like I really deserved it. Somehow Mother's grace gave it to me. So they all say that. Auspicious timing, very important. That has to do with your karmas, your gunas, and grace of the Divine Mother, whether or not you will arrive at an auspicious timing where you will see through Maya. And Maya kicks in right here, you see. God in the world, renunciation and compassion, and knowledge, and Maya all sort of form a nice composite paction right at this bend, the mountain range of realization. So he's coming down into these levels of consciousness. Now this level all has to do with the devotees, karma and reincarnation, and concentration. That's a long sweep. And then up here you're attended by these qualities of devotion, faith, guilelessness, that was one of Sri Ramakrishna's favorite words, and character, and there's of course the mountain of meditation that you learn. So these things all have to do with what we call Dharma Mega Samadhi. It's a kind of samadhi in itself where it means a rain cloud of virtues. You've discovered all these virtues in yourself before you went looking for them, and the more you searched for them, the quicker they ran away from you. The ego tried to claim them and it couldn't. But then when you sit and meditate and so forth, all of a sudden you find that these all exist in you already. Just like Shakti exists in Brahman, like burning power exists in fire. Yathagnurdhika Shakti Ramakrishna Stita Hiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Shardam Pranamamyaham. She exists in him as the burning power exists in fire. So they're one and the same. They used to ask Holy Mother, should we meditate on Ramakrishna, who's now passed, or should we meditate on you? She said, we're one and the same. take your pick. Whoever you favor. And maybe sometimes you feel like meditating on male, and sometimes you meditate on the goddess, you see. So that's your choice, isn't it? That's what auspicious timing is. Sometimes it's time for you to realize the Divine Mother. Other times you don't know anything about her and you're thinking about God as male. It happened historically, didn't it? It's been God as male all this time. But all this time is only 2,000 or 3,000 years. That's not very long. Mm-hmm. India started out as a matriarchy, most likely, in the Tantric period. They're uncovering, images of the goddess in the ancient excavations now. So there was every reason to believe that the Tantricists were there very early on, before it was even called Tantra. Tantra means that which saves. So Shiva and Shakti were there in the very beginning, the idea of male divinity, female divinity, and their union. Again, their natural union, not that you have to put them together. Does the burning power of fire go running looking for fire? Mm-hmm. See, it's already inherent in it. Just so in that way, realization is inherent in you. Samadhi is inherent in you, but you're going to have to realize it, that's all. God is in mankind, you have to bring it out somehow. Oil is in sesame seed. How much effort is it going to take to get it out, you see? So who picked up a sesame seed and said, gee, I think I'm going to get some oil out of this? Mm-hmm. And why would they go take the trouble to invent a press and have a harvest and press it and get a few vials of it and taste it and see, find out how nutritious it is? All that work just to find out oil and sesame seed, that's what they say you have to do to find out the divinity in mankind. It's hidden. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, when I walked along the water tank, it's a lake, I'd see these little bulwarks underneath, and that's where the fish and the crabs are hiding. So the wise fishermen, they stick their net under there. They don't go out in the lake and try and chance it, you see. But there's these hidden pockets of fish and crabs back under edibles, you see. So he said that's what man is like. There's these hidden qualities, divine qualities, guilelessness, faith, devotion, compassion, back in those hidden recesses where divinity exists in mankind. And you have to go find them out, chase them out of hiding. So around that corner you see concentration, discrimination, self-surrender. Remember, we're coming down the scale, down the ladder, down the radiant road. You get to chanting of God's name, prayer, and worship. There's the temple, you see. Holy company and sadhana you're going to need. So this really is the gradual rise of rectification from all of these things, reaching this pinnacle, this higher pinnacle of steep ascent of aspiration. You're gaining qualities. You're practicing the Dharma. Now, everything from there on down, you can see, begins to wane or pale. You have yearning for God, which Sri Ramakrishna said was the very first sign that you're seeking freedom. They used to go to him and say, the Hindu men and so forth would go to him and say, "Sir, what is the way?" That was the classic question in India at the time, in the 1800s. "Sir, what is the way?" If you said that, then said, "Oh, this must be a questioner, you see, a real questioner." And Ramakrishna's answer was always, yearning for God is the way. That's the beginning. If you can cry one tear for God, then you have yearning. But you're crying jugs of tears for wife and money and children and lands, you see. But you're not crying one sincere tear for God. So it all starts with yearning to be free, or for God realization or enlightenment, or however you want to put it. Yearning to be a better person would be just as good, to remake yourself, to improve yourself. So that's what rectification is, isn't it? So everything before that, you see, begins to come down into a more shady. There's duty and dharma, which is, according to Vivekananda, I can almost quote him verbatim, duty is the burning midday sun that is burning away at the very vitals of humanity. It's the hot midday sun. So duty is keeping people from going on. This is my duty, I have to stay here, you see. And I can't therefore move on in spiritual life. So duty and dharma is a very intermediate type of level. That is, it gets you out of adharma because you want to keep the mind busy. What's that? Idleness is the devil's playground. So an idle mind is brooding. See, if you leave it idle for too long, it's going to start brooding, and shadows and machinations and problems are going to enter into it, and pretty soon you have a habit of that. It's called a diseased or fragmented mind. So you want to keep the mind busy. So to that end, duty and dharma, very helpful. Anything prior to that would have been here at the foothills of attainment. You see, these are just the very basic attainments that you're talking about. Then comes the problems. You can see the gauge on the your left-hand side of the chart started out with eternal principles. It comes down to practices. Then it comes down to prerequisites. Then it comes down to impediments. You see, well, the impediments, occult powers, stiff, stark impediment, sensationalism, right there at the mounds of Maya attainment. Those are different than true attainment. Occult power, sensationalism, judgment and criticism. Pretty soon you get to the flatlands of groundless hope. There you have the 6 passions, the 8 fetters, egotism, desire, worldliness, and there's the house of the world. Christ says, birds have nests, foxes have holes, but the Son of Man hath no place to lay his head. Yet there he is laying his head in the flatlands of groundless hope. On emptiness, he's basing his house on shifting sands. Cannot build it on shifting sands. You have to build it on the bedrock of spirit, he said. And there is even lower to go than just worldliness, as we saw by this chart. You can go lower than just worldliness. You can begin to descend into evil doings. So insincerity, attachment to wealth, ignorance and bondage, wickedness and delusion. That's called moving through the graveyard of futile pursuits and ending up in the valley of delusion. So this chart is how a demonstration of this pristine consciousness comes down and works its way down into all these levels of human consciousness, even right on down into the animals, the insects, and the plants, because as we just chanted at the beginning of the class, that Atman is in everything. It's in every being, but it's also in everything. But it's not a thing, not a form. So it's there as the substratum or foundation of stones. Atman would be there. The stone has its stoneness because the Atman's there. Gold has its goldness because the Atman is there. Silverness has its silverness because the Atman is there. Woman has her womanliness because Atman is there. Man has his manliness because Atman is there. Take that away and there's nothing. So that's how formless it is, and that's how all-pervasive it is. And it even transcends qualities, doesn't it? Because qualities are something that you acquire along the way of spiritual ascent. They were in you all the time, but you're enacting the lila, the play of acquisition. If you're acquiring these things, it leads, to what is Caesar's. But if you're acquiring these things, you're taking to yourself what is the Lord's, to put an Easter turn on it. See? So, a chart here of Ramakrishna's radiant road to self-realization. You wouldn't want to be Elmer Fudd and try and say that. Sri Ramakrishna's radiant road to realization. You'd want to not have Elmer Fudd as a speaker at your Sangha, unless you want to crack them up. Now, in these 2 charts and these 2 halves, we have been able to present to you a composite picture of the avatar. Now, let's look at it philosophically a bit in these 2 charts, because I think there's just enough time to do so. This is called Chittabhasa, and this is called Stainless Cause of the Universe. This is a teaching of Vedanta. This is a teaching from Lord Vashishta. Now, looking at the Chittabhasa first, because I've already introduced it in a way. That is, when I said that everything is a suggestion from the causal and subtle body by the soul who's using the causal and subtle body, they're suggesting things to you just like I am now in teaching. I'm waking up pockets of knowledge in you that are already there by suggesting things that perk those areas and release those crabs and fish of knowledge in those hidden bulwarks under the lake and under the banks. So, in that same way, Chittabhasa works that way. And you can see here, basically, all is Brahman. The avatar is here, always one with Brahman. And through this rain of Mahashakti, this rain of grace, see, there she is, always with him but hidden. Everything comes down through that Mahashakti area, and then direct emanation of pure conscious awareness is there. It's from the buddhi that we see that. Here we cannot see it as anything but formless, but as soon as it hits the human intelligence, the intelligence of the gods and goddesses, the intelligence of the Trinity, and particularly the intelligence of the saints and seers and sages and the Trinity, then it turns into reflection of consciousness. So the Vedantist is never caught off guard by Maya, nor is he taking wooden nickels. He's not letting anything masquerade for Brahman. Brahman is Brahman, and there are some 10 or 12 ways that the Brahma Sutras treat that. Brahman is Brahman, Brahman is consciousness, so forth. They want you to concentrate only on Brahman as its own separate reality, because that's all there is Brahman. It is the only reality. So in the highest Advaitic courts, those teachings that are non-dual, if you've ever read the Brahma Sutras, you'll know what I mean. They're like the Zen koan of India. They're so sparse and so subtle that you can't understand it. You have to have a commentator. What's he saying? What's that scripture saying in those 5 words? And then you have to use inference and implication and so forth to get at those teachings. So they're leaving it very, very without doubt, free of doubt, that Brahman as absolute reality is completely formless, and that we begin to see everything as a form when it hits the cosmic intelligence, the buddhi. Chittabhasa is the very powerful word in Sanskrit. Chitbhasa, the reflection of consciousness through the intellect. So, for instance, again, if you saw a burning bush or you saw Christ on the road to Damascus, then you'd be seeing not Christ and not a burning bush. That doesn't happen. You're seeing a reflection of consciousness through your own intelligence. And there's a power behind that that's causing you to see that. So you don't take appearances for Brahman ever. No appearance can show you Brahman. Only Brahman can show you Brahman. And Ramakrishna told a beautiful story about that, about King Himalaya, the king of the snow mountains, right, the ancient mountains. All of a sudden, he and his wife found out that the Divine Mother was going to be born to them in human form. Her name was Umavati. She's the first name that appears in the ancient scriptures of India for Divine Mother reality. Umavati or Himavati, the mother of the eternal snow mountains. So they found out by divine vision, Chittabhasa, that this great being, Divine Mother of the universe, was going to be born to them as their baby. So when it was born, King Himalaya knew this was the Divine Mother of the universe. So as she grew up, he was always constantly attending upon her. And so as soon as she could form words, he took his chance. King Himalaya was a great spiritual opportunist. He said, "Oh, baby Uma, can you show me Hanuman? I always wanted to have a vision of Hanuman." "Why, sure, Father, here." And all of a sudden, King Himalaya was thrown into this inner Chittabhasa area of seeing visions, which are not Brahman. They are the reflection of our intelligence in our subtle body. And he saw Hanuman and talked with Hanuman and had his fill of darshan with Hanuman. So King Himalaya was not satisfied. He asked for visions of Shiva, asked for visions of Krishna, asked for visions of every god and god he could possibly think of, and got them. Then finally, he's thinking, what else can the Divine Mother of the Universe, and as my child, grant me? There's the formless Brahman. So he went to Uma and said, dear sweet child, can you give me a vision of the formless Brahman? And little baby Uma said, sorry, Father, that's not possible. You have to live with enlightened beings to get that vision. You'll have to visit the company of holy men who have had that vision to get that vision. So it marks it off as the most singular and rare of all realizations. It's called nirvikalpa. It's called nirvana. It's called satori, not for no good reason. That is the formless samadhi, and there's only one of them. There are dozens of samadhis in form. We just showed them to you. You see all these different forms you can have. Samadhis of compassion, samadhis of love, samadhis of this and that. But the formless samadhi is unique among all samadhis. Nirvikalpa, read my lips, or nirvana. That word nir means extinct. The candle has been blown out. Form has been extirpated. Name has gone away. Space has disappeared. Name, form, and space all gone in it. So what's left over is just nothing but the essence of consciousness, the light of Brahman. And that light is reflecting through the cosmic intelligence called the Mahat, or the Trinity, Brahma, Lord Brahma. And it's humming there as a word called Om. As it comes down, Chittabhasa is reflective consciousness. It hits these other areas. This is Brahmagyan, wisdom, spiritual wisdom appearing as various eternal principles. First, you'd say, prana and akasha, because God needs an energy to manifest himself with and a space to go to. And in accordance with your question this morning, that we were talking about prana and akasha and how they act together, I was explaining that prana is the more sentient energy that God will use to manifest himself in the form of an avatar. It's like Shakti, only Shakti in her true formless nature is one with Brahman, but when she appears through this process, she appears as prana, eventually as psychic prana, then finally as prana as life force, then finally as prana in food. That's Shakti appearing in everything, from the causal to the subtle to the gross. Everything is infused with energy, isn't it? Food has energy in it. You cannot live by bread alone, but nonetheless, your body is living by that bread, by that energy in that form. So you'd have to say, well, Shakti is just everywhere. And if you realize that, then you're having samadhi like Ramakrishna was all the time. He was seeing Shakti everywhere. His food was Shakti. People walking in were Shakti. He was in a non-dual state, so he could see that all the time. And when he came out of the non-dual state, he would still see everything as Shakti. So he was aware of that prana. Now, akasha, on the other hand, is space that prana will infill. They say nature abhors a vacuum. Well, so does consciousness, because a vacuum is a void, and a void has a word, and a word infers that someone has seen it and named it. So it cannot be the ultimate reality. You should avoid the void, therefore. You should start looking for fullness rather than emptiness. Emptiness is a stage. So when you see this formless, you're going to see it invested with prana. It has an energy that it flows with, like a great Garuda bird. That's really the symbology behind the great Hindu dragon, if you want to call him that, a Garuda. There's even an airlines called Garuda Airlines. I always wanted to ride it. See if I had a vision of Garuda on it. But Garuda is that great bird that takes Vishnu, one of the Trinity, on his rounds. He's going, so I'll talk about the rounds of birth and death. He's going to see the people who are laboring under the delusion of the rounds of birth and death. So he's going to go to every loka, every akasha, every world, and he does that through the prana. They've described prana in the Upanishads as a spider web, and Mother is the spider. So she's got a strand going everywhere, and somebody just touches it. Anyone, anything touches that strand. She, through vibration, she knows exactly what's happening there, and she can go there, or not. And she can also take the web and bring it back into herself. So they've described this web as the prana coming out from the purveyor of prana, the matrix, the ma, the matra, the matrix. You see the connections in all the words are mother power. So this is where energy is infusing, and if you look at the prana and the akasha and you take them as Brahman, then you're deluded. Brahman is Brahman. These are not Brahman. This is where things get dicey in the area of spiritual discrimination. It's easy to take wooden nickels or accept the unreal for the real. Of course, down here, people are doing it all the time. It's like the quote here, right? Very nicely put. That in this age of darkness, when viciousness and vile things become normal mode of behavior, then you know the Dharma is on the wane and Adharma is waxing. You see? And there has to be a great soul to come to make that, put that balance right again. And you are part of the emanation of that great soul. It's your responsibility as a follower of the avatar avada, the path of the knowledge of the great ones who come, whether they be avatars or even if they're seers or acharyas or teachers or whatever, to take their words and put them into action and help achieve that balance again for the world. Now, if you go a little bit further down the spectrum, because we're talking about avatar coming down, right? Because that's the meaning of the word, avatar, to descend, that which descends. I'd hate to say he or she because you don't want to bring gender into it yet. But gender does come into it down here, and you start thinking about the human ego-mind complex. Thought, conceptualization, visions, imagination, projection, invention, desire. These are some of the words that you can pin on that overall heading called sankalpa, with time, with imaginings. Sankalpa means, kalpanika means imaginings in time. They gave it that heading because they knew that you had hit Maya by now, and it was beginning to become dense and confusing, multifarious, Shatavadana, 1,000 things were beginning to happen on all different levels, and the soul is going to get distracted and confused if it's not careful. So it's hit Maya, it's hit the world of name and form in time and space, based in cause and effect. Cause and effect has kicked in, so now you're in a dangerous realm, a precarious position, the soul, the embodied soul has come. So, Kalpanika, imaginings in time, they called it that because they think this is the way of thinking from Lord Vashishta thousands of years prior to Christ all the way down to present time, that the universe is a manifestation of the mind. It's not created by God, and it's not created by nature. God is not in the picture, and nature is just a material cause of the universe. It's not the subtle cause. It's not the primal cause, it's not the remote cause, and it's not the causal cause. The word is that. So they've been thinking from time out of mind about everything coming from the word via vibration. It's called Shabda Brahman in Vedanta. And Srishti Rahasya in Tantra, the secret of all creationism is that the mind has been projecting things all the time. It starts with the cosmic mind, comes down to the mind of the gods and goddesses, comes down to the mind of the ancestors, comes down to the mind of humans, and it's all Chittabhasa. It's all reflected consciousness. That's how they've escaped the misnomer or the problem or the desecration of considering Brahman a form. They've never considered Brahman a form. It must remain formless. It must remain transformationless. Nevertheless, it's all pervasive. How about that for an ideology, or a philosophy, or a truth to meditate upon? That it's not in the thing, it's not the thing, but it's not even in the thing, it's the foundation of all things. How it can be all pervasive and at the same time not identified with the form. Keeping that sacrosanct, then, they began to see how Chittabhasa worked its way down the spectrum, and when it got to a causal level, and when it got to a mental level called subtle level, they began to understand how the worlds of name and form got projected by the mind. how everything is a thought. Everything is an idea. The tree is an idea, the river is an idea, the ocean is an idea, the sun, a billion suns are idea in the cosmic mind first, and then they come into being later as what we would call physical objects. The mind has the congealing power to do this. And it also has the dissolving power, and that's what people don't know. They can create something, they can sustain it, but they can't dissolve it because they're attached to it, right? If you love your life, you shall lose it, right? You shouldn't love your life. You should hate your life, because life is illusion. Because life is mated with birth and death, isn't it? And those are not true. So what you want to love is eternal life. And as soon as you do that or can do that, then birth, life, and death become dharmic, and you have no problem. But as long as you don't do that, it's adharmic, and you're fraught with problems. And the main problem is suffering. Everyone's business. From avatar to ant, everyone suffers. It's just that the avatars are suffering consciously, and everyone else is suffering unconsciously. If you suffer consciously, then you're taking it on as a sacrifice. Otherwise, birds and beasts suffer, and they don't know how to get out of it. And human beings are beast-like too, bestial, and they don't know how to get out of it. So they make matters worse by drawing everyone else into it. Birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death in rounds. The first avatar complained bitterly against that. He was just like Buddha. That is Ramchandra, we sang about him, complained bitterly about people engaging in rounds of birth and death and ignorance. He was a teenager when he went out of his father's castle, just like Buddha did thousands of years later. And he saw suffering, and he came back, and he wasn't the beaming, happy, inspired Sri Ram anymore, the apple of everyone's eye. He was this very quiet, very sobered, very studious, very indrawn young man. Changed him completely to see what was outside of King Dasaratha's palace. Thousands of years later, Lord Buddha did the same thing. He left King Sakya's palace and had those experiences of the four great signs, they call them. You know, he saw suffering in 4 ways. The diseased man, the old man, you know, the corpse being burned on the funeral pyre. He saw all that for the first time, and it just made him hands off of the whole thing. So it was like the avatar only needs that one thing to make him remember where he is and why he came there. That might be why they're so protected inside of, for a while, inside of, you know, a palace, you see. Other avatars, well, I think a manger will do, you see. I'll be protected by non-notoriety. I'll be born as a carpenter's son, and nobody will even expect it, you see. I'll come upon humanity later. I have a devious plan, you see. Nobody's going to recognize me for 30 years, maybe for 700 years, because Christ really wasn't known that well for hundreds of years. Neither was Buddha. His religion almost died in the first 500 years since his passing. And they had to make us householders interested in it, because it was only for monks in the beginning, and it began to die because how many of us want to be monks? Raise your hands. Why all the stillness? So, you know, that's renouncing internally and externally. They renounce externally. We must renounce internally. That is, know this is all Chittabhasa. It's all a reflection. We should not believe in it in the least. We should only believe in Atman, Brahman connection. We are Atman, all abiding, and Brahman is that reality. They have many ways of saying that. 4 particular ones called the Great Mahavakyas. I'll talk to you about that next week. Now, as you come down the spectrum and you get into these cosmic imperatives called time and space, they also go very much with energy and inner worlds. So you're talking about 5 subtle elements, 5 gross elements, the physical universe, and the flow of events, phenomena they're called, and karma that comes from that. And of course, that's getting even more convoluted. Nobody can work their way out of that. Even the avatar fears to go there. Ask anyone about karma, you're probably going to have to go to Sri Krishna, because Sri Krishna knows karma better than anyone. And he's an archetypical soul, so he could probably explain to you, like he did to Arjuna on the battlefield, why this karma has come to him, and what is the karma of everyone else on that battlefield. First puts it in very simple terms. He says, oh, those kings and those princes and those people over there, some of them your family that you're fighting against, this is how the cookie is crumbled. But you should know one thing. None of them were ever born and none of them will ever die. One of the greatest Mahavakyas of the Gita. There will never come a time when they will die, because there was never a time when they were ever born. Know that, Arjuna, before you go into the battle. See, what better advice for a warrior when he's going into a battle, not just a battle that's war, but a battle where his family is, some of his family is on the other side, and he may have to meet them on the battlefield and dispatch them. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, because it's the thing to be done. It's duty and dharma. It's the hot midday sun that's scorching him. He's born a warrior, has to do it. But if he knows that there's no coming and no going, that there's no birth and there's no death, then he can kill them and illuminate them at the same time. See, that's the teaching of Divine Mother. When she kills the asuras, they immediately get dispatched into enlightenment. There are beings on record that are asuric, and they aggravated Divine Mother on purpose so she would kill them so they would get enlightenment. Because they know they're not strong enough to get enlightenment on their own. They know they're asuric, they're dark, and that their tendencies are not good. They're never going to get auspicious timing, you see. So I think I'll go really insult Divine Mother. She'll kill me and I'll be enlightened, you see. So it's sort of like the energy, the prana, you see. We have this saying in our Ramakrishna order, you know, Yogananda Premananda Das Chanye Vaye Cha Parshada Ramakrishna Gata Prana Sarvantan Pranamamyaham. We salute the servants and the servants and the servants of the servants of Sri Ramakrishna, because Gata Prana, they have their prana, their life force, merged in him. So we have given ourselves to him, to that great avatar. All of our prana, all of our karmas, everything about us, all of our goodness, we've poured into the crucible of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Swami Vivekananda. He's been the one that poured it for us. Give yourself to the Son, he'll give you to the Father. So you get to the Father through the Son. So Ramakrishna got the prana, I have our life forces merged in him. Lex and I would look at each other right about now and say, why not? The other would say, yeah, why not? So let's do it. Now, these are cosmic principles. You know about them. 5 subtle elements in sleep. So you have the 5 subtle elements because you're building cloud castles in the sky in your dream world. So you have land, you have water, you have air, you have fire in your sleep too. So there are 5 subtle elements in there. And you have the 5 gross elements in the physical universe too. How much lower could you go, or denser could you go than the physical universe? Human embodiment in it. That is the body, the 5 senses of knowledge, and the 5 senses of action. And this is the karma shaya. What Father of Yoga said. The problem is that the seer has become identified with the seen. And now there's karma to pay. There's the devil to pay. There's no God and there's no devil in our tradition. There's just karma. You see, you're the God and the devil that's suffering or handing out the fruits, as the case may be, of that karma to yourself. It's your own conscience. Note the similarity between the word consciousness and conscience. It's all based in awareness. Now, let's read the 2 quotes. The first one is quite easy, and it's one of the Mahavakyas of Vivekananda's complete works. God is not in the universe is in God. You don't know how many people I've been able to put straight in their thinking by saying that. There are several things which I've used on people from the scriptures that have made a profound effect on people. So, on some people. So I keep them ready to say at a certain auspicious timing to a certain person, and they'll go, marvelous, marvelous. And a lot of their issues will be solved at that point. They make one huge step inward toward realization again. That's one of them. A lot of people think that God is in the universe, and they hear, so it's kind of fun actually just to say, God is not in the universe, and then watch them go, huh? And then come back and say, the universe is in God. And they go, oh, I see. So it's a catchphrase, turning something on its ear like that, because conventional thinking has posited it in such a way that we're taking Brahman, the formless, to be a form. We're taking the world to be real. There is no world outside of Brahman. So if you say this world is Brahman, then you've turned it on its ear, and you're looking at it from a non-conventional standpoint. And that's revolutionary. That's revolutionary to your thinking. And if it's revolutionary to your thinking, then it's going to be grounds for realization. It's going to be radical, not conventional. Now, this is a little longer the way Lord Vashishta puts it. He says, the embodied being is none other than an emanation of the jnana wisdom of Brahman. Perfect, huh? Emanation, jnana wisdom, where is it? Brahmagyan. Coming from Brahman as an emanation. Reflected consciousness, or Chittabhasa, Brahmagyan is the wisdom of Brahman. The hosts of myriad worlds and objects, appearing within endless cycles of time, duly shine as the objective vision and ideation of its inherent consciousness. Your consciousness. You see, the embodied being they're talking about, right? Thus it is one all-pervading Atman which assumes the name of the Jiva, materializing with the intelligence force of its own innate awareness. So take a nice long couple of sentences like that and chop them up slowly with a pause to consider and apply them to the Chittabhasa teaching in Vedanta, and you can see how these teachings have come out of the minds of the seers after long, long periods of reflection, of contemplation, and of meditation, as we were just saying. Chittabhasa. Now in the remaining 10 minutes, let's look at this chart, which is similar. This is from Lord Vashishta himself. You see there, Ishvaku asks Swayambhuva. Swayambhuva was one of the great souls of the solar line, sunborn, out of which later King Dasaratha and Ram came. The avatars came out of the solar line. So Swayambhuva is one of the great Manus, or great minds, that all of these families of divine beings came out of later, very early on. So Ikshvaku is one of the kings at that time, and he looked back and he loved Swayambhuva, who is long gone in the body, so he had to have darshan with him. He wanted to ask him something. So when he got this darshan, he said, whence came this universe? Can you answer it, for true, with finality for me? So the way it's put here in that story is all-pervasive Brahman, just like here. Then it hits the Shakti powers, just like here, right? So now you have the four Shaktis, though. He is giving it in terms of Jnana Shakti, Icha Shakti, Kriya Shakti, and Drovya Shakti. Icha Shakti is divine will. That's the mother of willpower. Jnana Shakti is the mother of wisdom. And Kriya Shakti is the mother of spontaneity. And Dravya Shakti is the mother who produces materials, like nature. So these are the four main Shakti powers in Tantra. If you want to know a little bit more about Shakti as a cover term, then you look into the Tantras and you'll find out that she has 4 main aspects, and then, just like Krishna, as we read, hundreds of forms through which her wisdom emanates and gets dispersed and dispensed. She's taking the form of Shiva and turning him into wisdom and then just dispersing it amongst the souls who are interested, who want it. That's her main directive. You can see there on the sidebar, potent Shaktis and many other minor Shaktis all commingling, so I put other little bubbles there because there are other levels of Shakti too that would mix in with those main 4. Potent Shaktis. In a kind of a target form again, it's one of our 3 or 4 target kind of charts, you see this inner line here, Atmic reality. And then how the Shakti would penetrate through this Hiranyagarbha, one of the most ancient words in all languages, particularly in Sanskrit, which means really, if you put it into English, it really much looks like what it is, an egg. It's a cosmic egg out of which everything came. So you're talking about the Trinity on down, really. If you look at it in terms of Om, and the teachings of the Trinity, then you'd start calling it in tantric terms like Bindu, Nada, Kalatita. That's the Trinity you'd right away think of. Bindu would be like what the Hindu ladies wear here, right? But also, that's just to say I'm married. But the Shaktas also wear a red mark here. That means I'm a devotee of the Divine Mother. So when you go to puja, you'll get a kumkum mark there, you see. And they say, oh, I've been to a Divine Mother puja. So I can see you a mile away in India. You say, he's been to Divine Mother puja. You see, he's a Shakta. He worships Mother. And you say, yes, we're proud of it. You see, I'm Mother's boy. So that cosmic egg is under her protection. They say actually that the egg is born from the inchut sound that happens when Shiva and Shakti get together. It's a love sound. That's how the Tantras explain it. Shiva and Shakti come close, and when she comes close to him, a great music called Om strikes up, a humming, and that gives rise to the cosmic egg. And when the cosmic egg bursts and gives birth, it gives birth to all the realms. You can see the difference in approach and explanation between Tantra and Vedanta. See, that's why these 2 charts are kind of nice, contrasted together. More philosophical on this side, and a little bit more towards the deification of principles, Tattvagyan, on this side. So out of that, penetrating that egg, she pervades, right? We call her all-pervasive. Then inside of that egg, when it bursts, gives rise to all of these things. All universes, 5 elements and objects, pretty much what was here, but in a much shorter list. And also emanated, you see, eternal Jnana rays, always like these rays, like raindrops of Dharma Mega Samadhi, infusing all of the world so that everything there is infused with Shakti power. Everything there is infused with intelligence. If you can see that, then you sit to eat, you have a kind of food samadhi. You see, I'm eating my own intelligence. I'm eating my own ideas. Or if the inventor is building a house, I'm constructing a house based on my own ideals. It all happened in my mind first, then it happened outwardly with the help of the 5 elements. If I compose a piece of music, I hear it first, then I put it into an instrument or a series of instruments, and it begets its manifestation. No matter which way you look in any walk of life, the emanation of Jnana rays, or how both systems explain it. It's an emanation of wisdom, Chittabhasa. It's coming off the buddhi, your intellect. And that intellect has a very high level to it. Cosmic, you might call it. Even beyond cosmic, because this is called the cosmic egg, right? So beyond what things are cosmic, what a lot of the gurus of the 60s were talking about cosmic consciousness, they were not providing yet for the higher teachings of Shakti and Brahman. They were pretty much focusing on cosmic consciousness, and you wanted to have that as your vision. But actually to penetrate, if you're coming like Ramakrishna's road, if you're coming from ignorance into light and from light into realization, you're going to penetrate that in reverse fashion, and you're going to get to realization of Divine Mother. She will be your guide, which is what I say one of the great facets that Ramakrishna has brought us. Guess what? Holy Mother said, Ramakrishna has come this time for everyone. The avatar of this age has come for everyone. The wise, the learned, and the ignorant, and the evil. Everyone now can get enlightenment by coming to Ramakrishna. He used to say that himself. People of this age will get truth if they come here and eat his own heart. So he meant, come to your own heart. He also said, come to the heart of the avatar. Because if you find your own heart, you'll find Ishvara. You'll find Antaryami. Beautiful song about that, really. Dharmahana harakam tva dharma karma varakam loka dharma charanasya sarva dharma kovidam jagagehi sevya nicha pavagantri pankajam tam mamami deva deva ramakrishnam ishwaram. And it has some 9 or 10 other verses. Tam namami deva deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram. You are that Ishvara form. Ishvara, you are that Antaryami, the inner ruler, immortal, seated in the heart of all things, of all beings. And so the manifestation of that is through intelligence. This is why Buddha named himself after it. Buddhi means intelligence. See? It's non-dual intelligence. But it has the ability to burgeon. In fact, interesting that Bri, the Sanskrit root to this word, means to expand. Now, Brahman does not expand and contract, but its Shakti has the power to do that, you see. So there again, you have to be very careful. You're calling Brahman a form, you're calling Brahman a process, you're assigning evolution and involution to Brahman. Wrongity, wrong. See, you have to discriminate deeper than that. She has the power to burgeon, and she will be in charge of all the worlds of name and form and time and space. Even she transcends them. But you can see why, because they're beginning to outline who she really is. Now, this is an interesting part of the chart, and we have just 5 minutes to explain it. The soul here in the universe can go 2 different directions, according to this teaching of Lord Vashishta. It can go towards Chinmatra, that is, that which will destroy the ignorance. Or it can associate itself with ego and sankalpa. We already defined the term sankalpa, imaginings in space and time. It can go towards fantasy. It can go towards desire. It can go towards creationism and create illusion or bondage for itself. But if it goes the other direction and associates with Chinmatra, matra, element, like A of Om or U of Om or M of Om is a matra. Matra also means mother, mother particle, mother wisdom. Chin means consciousness, Chinmaya. So Chinmatra means the particle of intelligence in you. If you go towards that, then you can penetrate through and destroy Sankalpa and get to Atman. See, you can fuse your thoughts with Atman. You do not confuse your thoughts with Maya. You fuse your thoughts with Atman. And therefore, you would get to what's called attainment of abhava, or non-existence. They who love their life shall lose it. They who hate their life shall gain it in eternal life. You get to abhava, that is non-existence. You realize that through formlessness, non-existence of form and name and time and space and the suffering and karma that happens inside of Maya, you get to freedom. You get free and you get bliss and knowledge. He says here at the bottom, after calming Sankalpa, contemplates all things with the eye of abhava and wear it like a sword. So we come to that state of of one mood, the mood of non-dual awareness, the mood of enlightenment, the mood of illumination. You're coloring everything real. And every time you put on those glasses, everything looks real to you. See, everything is colored with Brahman consciousness. You see everything as Brahman. So that's the way we would look at it in a more of a kind of Yoga Vashishta view, and as compared to the way they would explain it in Advaita Vedanta. And you can see the similarities there are paramount, but the different ways of describing open doors for the mind on both the level of the mind and the heart, the devotion of non-separation, as we were talking about last weekend. So I think that is my presentation about the Advaita of the avatars, and I hope you're on hand next week, which is live streamed. Yes. Is it here in this ashram? Because Pahoa happens the week after, right? So next week we will be here at the Hawaii ashram, and we'll be entering into our second class on the Advaita of the avatars. I'll have at least 2 new charts, I hope, that I should have had ready today, ready for you, called the Mahavakya of the avatars and Progress Towards Freedom. And we will look at the teachings in that way. So I hope you're on hand for that. You're welcome. Your friends are welcome. And now let's end here with a chant. Om Sato, Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya, Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamoya, Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamoya, Abira Bira Mayeti, Rudrayate Dakshinamukam, Tenamam Pahinicham, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari